Hello and welcome to Israel Update. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and also director of the Center for Peace and Peace and Security in the Middle East. Mr. Mike Doran is not in Washington, D.C. I always get stuck with your title because I want to say peace and prosperity.
I'm trying to hold my glasses so that my screen doesn't reflect on them.
Thanks for.
I'm trying to look dignified. I'm trying to look dignified and yet not reflective.
What? Not reflective.
Yeah.
You're making it hard for me to introduce you as a director of a center, but let's
Okay.
forget about that. You're in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and behind you is your mother-in-law's Christmas tree.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
What do we have for you today? A great tragedy. 3 hostages trying to escape were shot by the IDF. We'll hear about that in a minute in the bulletin. Demonstrations against Netanyahu finally reached I wouldn't say considerable, but a noticeable volume. Is that a beginning of a trend? We will ask. Does that go with machinations inside the coalition and outside it? Is the United States, that's not a question actually, is the United States trying to dictate to Israel who should govern it? And and 2 more subjects: Sullivan's the visit here, the national security advisor of the Biden administration, and the Houthis are causing mischief at seas. Mike says, I quoted him on Twitter today, this is far more important than people realize. And in the end, we have the dumbest take on the news for you, and I will surprise you today, Mike.
Okay.
So first,
I have one today, but it's more depressing than dumb.
you would not be able to guess mine because it's tricky.
Okay.
It's tricky.
Okay.
But first the bulletin, the headlines.
Okay. So, as you mentioned, we've got 3 Israeli hostages were shot dead by IDF troops on Friday in Sajaiya. That's in the northern Gaza Strip. Israeli political and military officials uniformly described the incident as a tragedy, and the chief of staff and the defense minister both publicly assumed responsibility for it. According to the IDF's preliminary inquiry, the 3 hostages had been waving a white flag and were baring their torsos to show that they were unarmed and were not wearing any bomb belts. An IDF sniper nevertheless shot and killed 2 of the hostages. The 3rd hostage fled to a nearby building and called out in Hebrew to the Israeli troops who had gathered outside. But upon emerging from the building, he was shot dead as well. The chief of staff said in his statement that the soldiers had violated the IDF rules of engagement. Yossi Yehoshua, he's a prominent newspaper commentator. He wrote the following: "One can understand the physical and mental stress that the soldiers operating in Sajaiya have to deal with. They have been at war for 2 months, most of which they have spent in the most complicated area for combat of this kind, facing a challenge that no modern military has ever faced." But Nahum Barnea, another commentator, was far less forgiving. He writes that this incident was not a tragedy, but a crime. As the IDF inquiry proved, military orders were violated here wholesale. And then he says, this is a quote: "The popular accounts of the troops' actions are absurd. When they're successful, they're superheroes. When they fail, they're kids," unquote. The United States is reportedly assembling a task force to protect Red Sea shipping from the attacks of the Houthis. As a result of the attacks, several major global shipping companies have suspended passage through the Red Sea. On Friday, 2 of the world's largest shipping companies, Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, called off passage through the sea until further notice. And then finally, there was an attack this morning, Gadi, on the Israel-Lebanon border. Hezbollah terrorists fired an anti-tank missile at Kibbutz Sasa in the Upper Galilee. No injuries were reported, and the IDF returned fire. I suspect this is a bigger deal than has been reported. because Kibbutz Sasa is more than 5 kilometers from the border. Hezbollah has been very meticulous about not going beyond the 5 kilometer line, 5 or 7 kilometers. This is a bit further. This is a bit of military signaling, a kind of escalation, if you will, escalation within certain limits by Hezbollah. I suspect that that's what's going on. I need to talk to somebody who's really on the border and following this closely. But nobody, I noticed that the Israeli press doesn't really discuss these equations that exist between Hezbollah and the IDF about what's an acceptable target and what's not. And when one goes beyond a certain line, then the other one responds with an escalation.
Well,
Back to you.
the Israeli press is playing the blame game most of the time, and most of it is trying to blame Netanyahu. The other part is trying to shift the blame somewhere else, and therefore, surprisingly, Israelis are not paying attention to the nuances of the news and are living out Kissinger's indictment when he said that Israel does not have a foreign policy, only a domestic policy. So it's up to us, Mike, to give Israel an outside perspective.
I have to say this war does change my understanding of some previous as you know, I did a lot of research recently on the 73 war, and which is the experience that led Kissinger to make that statement. And I kind of understand his perspective a lot better now, because the domestic politics is constant here. There is no foreign policy.
Yeah, that's where we're at. So in domestic policy, great turmoil. I think we'll have two occasions to speak about that. One is the fractures in the coalition, which we'll get to when we speak to Jake Sullivan's, how should I call it, dictates, edicts, instructions, advice.
These were
friendly
advice. Yeah, this was friendly
advice.
advice. Where he said in his interview with Yonit Levy that this is that friends give advice to friends, and it's the United States isn't dictating.
Yeah. We'll actually screen that part of the conversation with Yonit Levy, which was framed very oddly by Yonit Levy in Israel. Let's get to that when we get to Jake Sullivan. The repercussions of the incident with the accidental or criminal, Nachum Barnea would say, killing of escaped hostages, I go with tragedy, certainly had immediate repercussions on. This happened when I was doing my you now know we do this. We do a sort of pirate live YouTube, Facebook, Twitter show to compete with the leftist shows that dominate.
When you say we, you're not talking about me and you. You're talking about you.
No, a group of us in Israel.
You and your other friends.
Yeah, me and my other friend. And we're doing this because the only thing that Israel has for something like a Fox channel, something like a right-wing TV outlet, is a religious outlet, and it doesn't broadcast on Shabbat. So the left has a clear field to dictate the narrative.
Channel 14
does not broadcast on Shabbat.
I did not know that.
So on Shabbat evening, what is happening is that the left completely dominates the news cycle and often spreads, at best, I'd say leftist takes, sometimes complete fake news that nobody's there to refute until the next day.
And can I assume that the viewership on Friday night for the Friday night news in Israel is huge?
It is huge. Yeah, it's the show of the week, and they have a completely empty goalpost to kick to.
Why has Channel 14 or the right wing in Israel why have they not filled up the space? Why is there no Fox News? How come it's up to Gadi Taub and his friends to fill this space?
First of all, never underestimate Gadi Taub and his friend.
Yes.
Secondly,
I'm sorry.
Secondly, it's very hard to get in the market in Israel, and historically, the left has been very successful in shutting down right-wing outlets, if not delegitimizing them, if not hounding them. The whole Netanyahu trial began with Netanyahu's attempt to diversify the media in Israel. So yeah, so we are doing this show, and the Dover Tzahal, an IDF spokesperson, announcement about the 3 hostages arrived as we were doing it, and that it stopped the conversation short. And immediately after that, there was a demonstration, and they tried to go back and block the Ayalon highway. I think unsuccessfully. It's not a large number, but then on Motzei Shabbat, after it's Saturday night in I guess American terms, there was a demonstration that they said where there were tens of thousands. One outlet said 10,000. Usually, when the
you divide by 10.
You sometimes divide by the Kaplan demonstration had to be divided by 20. They checked it with the AI, and they didn't mind exaggerating that far. So I would take, my usual care with left-wing reportage about reporting about left-wing demonstration is they count limbs, not heads. So divide at least by 4. So it's the first. Yeah, sorry.
No, sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just realized that while we're talking here, we probably need to explain. I'm going to tell you what I think
Americans
happened.
Understand.
Yeah, and then you tell me if I've got this wrong, because it's interesting. So we have these 3 hostages. They got away from their captors, or the captors let them go, and then they came out and they were killed by the Israelis. Now, outside of Israel, this is being reported as a sign that the Israelis are killing people wholesale. So this is that the killing of the Israelis who were held hostage by Hamas is a sign that Israel has very lax rules of engagement when shooting at Palestinians. But inside Israel, and I suspect that for some of our viewers, what you're saying isn't clear. Inside Israel, this doesn't get refracted through that lens, the lens of Israel versus the Palestinians. It's getting refracted through the lens of Netanyahu is responsible for this tragedy. Is that right? We've lost you here. I can't hear you. You're muted somehow.
Sorry. The answer is yes, although not directly this time. Netanyahu is not blamed now for killing the 3 hostages, but for not doing enough to release the hostages. And as we've said here all along, there are the organizations that led the anti-Netanyahu protest in all its previous forms have penetrated the committee of the relatives of the hostages and are trying to leverage this issue in order to topple the government. So that's what we saw on Friday night. That's what we saw on Saturday night. And for the first time, they brought noticeable numbers. I wouldn't say considerable numbers. And I think they're out on a limb and that this is not going to work. So here's where the calculation is wrong. They're thinking in the old terms. What happened to Israel is an existential change. It is not part of the old games between left and right. We are now in a place in our history where existential fear of actually being killed, murdered, tortured by terrorists personally, and also a mortal danger to the Zionist project. It was just now Hanukkah. As you know, the Maccabim have managed to create a nation state of sorts for the Jews, and it didn't last beyond 7 and a little decades. So the fear, we've just had Hanukkah. This is where they celebrate the Maccabim. This is very palpable and present. Suddenly, there's a feel that the danger is existential, and these people are playing politics with the hostages. Now, you may have sympathy for the parents of the hostages demanding that everything would be subordinate to returning the hostages. So there's the demand of a ceasefire in exchange for the hostages, and there's a demand for all for all. All the hostages for all the 6,000 terrorists that we held before October 7, plus about 1,500, or maybe now more from Gaza. We don't know the numbers after October 7. And these things are stand in on a collision track with what I think is the most a dominant sentiment of Israeli society that we all feel in our gut before our brain, is that we have to win this war. If not in this round, then in the next round somehow. If we run into a roadblock because of American pressure or other, we'll have to do it by other means. But no one in his right mind thinks that Israel can put itself in mortal danger in return for hostages. This is, and whoever is doing these machinations and calculations, very cynical political manipulators known as strategic advisors, one of the most horrible professions under the sun, are just making small advertising agency calculations, and they're way off the mark. I'll give you an example. Achim Laneshek, brothers in arms. Stop me, Mike, if we've discussed this here, because I've talked about it everywhere.
No, I think it's good to I think it's good to talk about it, but I wanted to stop you here to just to make sure you mentioned Ehud Barak. Are you going to talk about this video that is circulating now, the 555 video? Because it's quite amazing.
It is amazing, and I think we should save this for when we translate it. So let's get a translated.
All right. So
translated English
very
version,
interesting,
because it is amazing.
I used to do this when I taught at university, and whenever a student would ask me a question that I didn't know the answer to, I would say, we're going to talk about that next week. Great question. We'll talk. You're so smart to ask that question.
So
I'm really glad you're ahead of me, but we'll talk about it next week.
So we'll have
then I would go read and figure out what the answer was, and then
we'll have it because I'm going to ask our friend Elizabeth Rimini, who's doing volunteer translations for us, to do an English version. What I did is I edited
mysterious Elizabeth Rimini. Amazing and mysterious.
I can't finish the sentence, Mike.
No, I'm sorry. I apologize. Go ahead.
I'll finish it next time.
Go ahead, finish it now. It's very smart of you to think of this question. I'm glad, but I'm going to let you do it now.
I edited a 3-minute version of the whole Barak structure of argument, and I did it, and I played it. I put it on my social media, and I saw you retweeted it, and we'll have a translation for it. But what I wanted you to show now is this ad, and what you are looking at in the very small print are the names of all the hostages. Or of all the dead, sorry, there are 1,200 names. Now, this organization is the anti-Bibi organization called Achim Laneshek, Brothers in Arms. As we've noted, when they went to America, they called themselves Brothers and Sisters in Arms. And what it says at the top is, for us, there are brothers. For him, they are just extras in his campaign. And so, and they took all the real names. And note, Mike, how far this is afield for any true estimation of public sentiment, that you think that your goal of removing Netanyahu is just so just that you can freely use the names of all the dead, many of them Netanyahu voters.
It's actually the opposite of what they say. They're using all of those people as extras in their political campaign.
Yeah, and it was immediately obvious to everyone, and there was an outcry, and part of the outcry came from the families of the people who were dead and mentioned in these ads. So these arrogant people took the ad off, and I'm mentioning this just to say that Ehud Barak, about whom we'll talk next time, and Achim Laneshek, Brothers and Sisters in Arms, and the committee of the hostages infiltrated by the anti-Bibi crowd are all making a wrong calculation. And the terrible result is going to be a clash between the families of the hostages and the general public. Because when push comes to shove, the Israeli public will not agree to stop the war, which means surrender after this massacre, in order to save the hostages. And note, Mike, people are sending their sons and daughters to die there, and many are dying, and they are not going to agree to any deal that says, oh, we sent our kids to die for nothing, but the hostages will be returned. So
let me put a scenario to you though, that
yeah,
because there was also in the news, I didn't mention it in the news bulletin, but there was this whole issue of David Barnea going to Qatar, and supposedly that is that the head of the Mossad, who is conducting the hostage negotiations with the Qataris, the Americans, and the Egyptians. He was supposedly prevented from, there was some plan in the works, and he was supposedly prevented by Netanyahu from going. I didn't try to dig into whether it's true or not, but it intersects with all that you're saying.
exactly.
Because if it just unfolds as the families demanding all of the things that you're saying, that they're demanding all for all, or a pause or whatever, then it's the families versus Netanyahu. But if there's a real offer on the table brokered by the Americans, and it's not a good offer, then it becomes a 55-45 calculation or something like that by the government. Then it's a lot harder for Netanyahu or Gallant, whoever wants to, if they're inclined to argue against the deal and to say we should keep fighting. Gallant has already many times said, no more pauses. We're going to fight until we win. But if there's an offer on the table, and if the Americans are pushing it hard, then you'll have a much more difficult coalition to come up against, to oppose.
I disagree, although in quantity, not in quality. I think it will be a little harder, but just a little, because I think the Israeli public is the sense of determination is galvanizing, and I think people are internalizing the fact that we're in this for the long haul. This is not just a short campaign.
And people are. What's your sense of the feeling on the street? Is there a sense that the ceasefire and the release of the hostages that we had, the pause and the release of the hostages that we had a couple of weeks ago, is your sense that people think that was actually not worth it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We are also very sentimental about these things. And this is an old Jewish tradition, pidyon shvuim, returning hostages for ransom. But I think as the will is galvanized here, the need to stand behind whoever commands our soldiers, which happens to be the Netanyahu government, will trump everything else. And this is what the anti-Bibi movements are trying to say. We should replace Bibi and then think what to do, because Bibi is the problem. And many more Israelis are saying our soldiers are fighting now. It's not. We will talk about this later, but the idea, they're not managing to create a sense, despite their media influence, that Bibi is somehow running the war terribly. And if Israelis thought that that was the case, then they might have replaced him. So they're trying to say Chamberlain was replaced, in the middle of a war. It was already a war, and Chamberlain was replaced. But then he was replaced by a Churchill, which we have none. And it's more like Pearl Harbor here. So you could have people saying, oh, Roosevelt's policy was not very good in the Pacific, but now he's the commander in chief and we all rally behind him. So they've managed to hurt Netanyahu a lot, but not quite that much that the Israeli public would
this episode of the 3 soldiers who were killed by mistake, that doesn't automatically fall on one side or the other of this.
No,
I mean, people,
not at all.
it tears at people's hearts. They feel for the guys who got away and then only to die. But it doesn't immediately say, oh, Netanyahu is screwing this up.
No. that would be hard to stick to Netanyahu, although the press is trying. The press is trying and becoming, in my estimate, more and more pathetic as it does more and more remote from reality. Jake Sullivan visited us here and was very polite, wasn't he?
The performance, I put it on my Twitter feed, which is at Doranimated for anyone who hasn't gone on my Twitter feed. He did this a 10-15 minute interview with Yonit Levy of Channel 12, is it,
Yeah.
Gadi? And I actually marveled at his talents. He gave, I think it was a letter perfect performance, where he said, you know, we're supporting Israel to destroy Hamas. And when he was really saying but the real message is we are restricting it. We are the underlying message was, which was very clear in the Israeli news, that the Americans are saying you Israel have to stop a major intensive war sometime in January. Exactly when is not clear. The original American message was 1 January. Then the reports in the Israeli press say that the Israelis came back and said we need the rest of the month. So presumably they agreed to the rest of the month or to the middle of the month, something like that. I don't know. But there's going to be a transition from intensive major military movements to more targeted attacks. So what's going to happen is the IDF is going to retreat, not completely from the Gaza Strip, but out of the centers of population in the Gaza Strip, and then it's going to carry out targeted raids against Hamas leadership, and it's going to stop the effort to destroy all of the battalions, kill every fighter, destroy every tunnel. The Israelis have got another month to go at that kind of activity. We'll see how far they get. I'm starting to have doubts that they're going to go after all the tunnels in Rafah and actually control Rafah itself, which I think is probably necessary for total victory. So what that means is, in practical terms, the Americans are still saying, yes, you can destroy Hamas completely, but you have to do it in a different way. What that's going to do is prolong the war. You just mentioned a moment ago that Israelis are increasingly have the sense that they're in it for a very long time. This war is going to go on for at least another year, I believe. At this point, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like.
Let's watch Sullivan explain how the United States admires democracy to Yonit Levy.
And he said this about Netanyahu. He said he's a good friend, but I think he has to change. And with this government in Israel is making it very difficult for him to move. Does the president think that Israel should change its government?
He's going to let the Israeli people decide for themselves what their government looks like and what their elections look like. As a very seasoned politician, he believes in democracy and he believes that the citizens of a country should choose their own government and would not have it any other way.
Yeah.
So, Gadi, the American policy toward the day after in Gaza, what the Americans are dictating to the Israelis is we have to have a revitalized Palestinian Authority working together with the Saudis and the Qataris and the I don't know who Emiratis to rule over Palestinian society in the Gaza Strip that will be completely shorn of any connection to Hamas is a total fantasy. This is not going to happen, and this cannot happen in the way that the Americans are saying it, because there's no revitalized Palestinian Authority that's waiting in the wings, ready to take over it. There's no Palestinian society that isn't in Gaza that isn't totally penetrated by Hamas, that's waiting to be taken over by the Palestinian Authority and won't work to subvert the Palestinian Authority. The restrictions the Americans are putting on the Israelis are going to ensure that the Israelis themselves cannot be the ones to separate the Palestinian society from Hamas. So it's all pie in the sky. It's complete fantasy. Now, the problem, Israelis will typically hear this kind of thing and they'll say, these Americans are very naive. But they're not naive, Gadi. They're cynical. It's not the same thing. They're using this pie in the sky moral language about that, we're going to build democracy in Gaza, just like they built democracy in Afghanistan, democracy in Iraq, toppled Hosni Mubarak to build a greater democracy in Egypt. How have those projects been going? Democracy in Gaza. When I was in the White House, we pushed the elections in the Palestinian Authority that gave us Hamas in Gaza. So the idea that we're going to get a better result this time seems to me to be a little bit silly. However, this pushing of insisting that the Israelis agree to the Palestinian Authority now, all of this is designed to cause trouble for Netanyahu. This is to trip him up. This is indeed to split his coalition, to cause problems for him, to topple him. He's now polling, the Likud is polling at what in the polls? Gantz's party is polling around 50%, or it's in the high 40s, isn't it? Or no, it can't be. High 30s, sorry.
30 there's a difference between Gantz himself and the party, and a difference between
That's why I got confused in my head. I was forget it.
Yeah, but he's leading.
Yeah, but the Gantz's party is polling at 30 some odd seats, 36 seats, something like that. And Netanyahu's party, Likud, is polling at like 17 seats. But yes, who should be prime minister? Gantz is polling at around 51% or something, I think, in the last poll I saw. I should never talk about numbers because I always forget them. But anyway, the Americans are looking at that and they're thinking, let's move Netanyahu out, let's move Gantz in. That's what this is all about.
And about this, they're also being naive, Mike, not just cynical. And I'll tell you why.
Can I add one more angle to this?
Sure.
Sorry. And that's the Saudi angle, because one of the things they're doing is they're dangling out in that interview with Yoni Levy. It wasn't in the clip that you just played, but they're saying, you have to have international financing and support from the Arab world for this revitalized, revamped Palestinian Authority. So this is so that Nahum Barnea and other people in the Israeli press can say, we could have normalization with Saudi Arabia and the embrace of the entire Gulf world of us if it wasn't for Smotrich and Ben Gvir, that is the right-wing elements in Netanyahu's coalition. Also not true. It's not like the Saudis are just dying to come hug you and kiss you. This is not.
Oh, I'm going to cut this and post this and translate it into Hebrew, Mike, because this is what you just said, because this is so what's going on in the Israeli press, and it's so silly. But what I was going to mention is, look at what is happening to Gantz and Lapid, the opposition. Gantz is now in the coalition, but he's the contender. So the Americans are trying to construct this arc in which there would be demonstrations in the street against Netanyahu, a split in the coalition around the issue of the future or the post-war arrangements, and then they will split Gantz from Netanyahu, and then there would be some members of Likud willing to desert, because the Knesset is still the same, and we have no election, willing to desert to the Gantz camp. But the problem with this is there was a press conference, and the Channel 14, very sharp political correspondent, asked Gantz, do you support a Palestinian state? And he wouldn't answer. He just wouldn't answer. It was incredibly embarrassing. And you understand completely why. Because the minute you join the American bandwagon for a Fatah in Gaza and a two-state solution, everything you said about Gantz's amazing numbers just evaporates.
They disappear. No, this, by the way, when I was trying to decide what should be the dumbest take, I was reading a Washington Post editorial that came out, I don't know, Friday, Saturday. So the editorial board position, and they said, okay, look, usually when there's a major terrorist attack against Israel, it pushes public opinion to the right wing. But this one is different because look at the polling, and Netanyahu has gone down, but Gantz has gone up. So it's actually pushed people to the left and made them more amenable to a two-state solution. But that is, of course, a very stupid take because, yes, they're holding Netanyahu, who was prime minister forever for 20 years more, on and off, and whose policy toward Gaza was proven to be false or proven to be defective, and who was the man in charge when this horrible thing happened. So yes, his popularity has gone down, but it doesn't mean that the popularity of a two-state solution has gone up. It's
No,
ridiculous.
So this whole arc is going to fray the minute Gantz commits to the American plan that is supposed to give him the prime ministership. So you understand what bind he is in, and he was completely tongue-tied. He had no way out of that situation. And you also and at the beginning of the war, because Lapid is such a a sock puppet for this administration, because Lapid is basically a celebrity that conquered the prime. He's like, people are there are many Lapid jokes about his vacuity. What would you say? Emptiness.
Yeah, maybe vacuousness.
Vacuousness.
Is that, I don't know, vacuity? Is vacuity a word? It may or may not be a word. I don't know.
Ask me. Ask me about Hebrew.
Anyway, his emptiness,
And he is considered to be extremely
suitedness.
shallow. There is on
Yeah.
Channel 14. There's actually there's a regular spot called Halapid ve'yipucho, the Lapid and his opposite, where you take opposite sets of things that he said in different, and they have enough to, like, it's a daily thing for years. They have enough because he just says whatever fits the situation. So immediately after the White House, if you look at Lapid's Facebook page, you will see that he is bowing before Biden and making a joke that makes Biden laugh. It's like a head of state should never, ever put anything like that on Facebook. It looks so servile. But for him, here's the biggest celebrity in the world, and he's my buddy. That's the message, and this is how he thinks. So when this broke out, Lapid immediately said that the only rational solution is to give Gaza to the Fatah. And he backed off after 3 days when he read the polls. It was just,
Wow.
and this is a Lapid ve'yipucho, yeah, the Lapid and its opposite. He immediately backtracked because everyone understands. What did people say? There's a very, very iconic poem in Israel called Magash HaKesef, the silver platter. And this began with Chaim Weizmann, who said to his Zionist fellows, he said, a people doesn't get a state on a silver platter. And then Natan Alterman, the greatest poet Israel ever had, wrote in the middle of the War of Independence, wrote a poem called Magash HaKesef. And he said, the youth, the young males and females, our young men and women, are the silver platter on which the state of Israel would be given to the Jewish people. And it's a poem about these people, the young dying.
Does he mean the dead young, the young
Yes.
men and women who have
Yes,
sacrificed their lives?
Yeah. And it's an incredibly moving song. We have it on Memorial Days. Everybody knows it. And then after Lapid said that, people immediately started writing. So the IDF soldiers dying now are the silver platter on which this terrorist Mahmoud Abbas will return to Gaza. So you understand what the very attempt to touch this amazing American plan in Israeli politics is toxic like Chernobyl. You can't get near it. Nobody can get near it. So the Americans are both cynical and naive in this respect. Mike, we don't have time. It's been a pleasure, but we've run out of time, and we do want to talk about the Houthis, which, since you say this is far more important than the media makes it out to be.
I want to make 3 points about the Houthis.
Yeah.
One is that they are a greater military threat to Israel than people realize. Their ballistic missiles have not gotten through Israel's net yet, but if they did, they would be a much bigger. They would do a lot more damage than has been reported. I mean, people haven't really. I don't think they have a sense of the threat from Hezbollah. They don't think of the threat from the Houthis. The Houthis are not as big of a threat as Hezbollah, but they could do a lot of damage to it. Like, a city, a neighborhood in Eilat. The second point
they also sit on the straits that lead out of the Red Sea, and they can block all our southern traffic. Yeah,
that's the second point. Actually, I want to make 4 points. The second point is that they are sitting on the straits there, the Bab el-Mandeb, which is, of course, leads to the Suez Canal. And the 2 points I want to make about this are, number one, that the number of interdictions that they have engaged in, the number of attacks and interceptions of shipping that they have done, has had an outsized effect on shipping. I mentioned today in the news that two major companies have announced that they're no longer going to go through the Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal. Many others have decided not to do it, but haven't announced it. So we're going to find out a month or two from now, when we see the volume of traffic through the Suez Canal, that it has dipped considerably, which leads to my next point. This is having an outsized international effect that nobody's talking about. So, for example, the Egyptian government, which is very dependent on the Suez Canal for its budget, is complaining to the Americans for sure. Every shipping company is complaining. And the Americans are supposedly putting together an international coalition, a flotilla to protect shipping. But let me ask you something, Gadi. If you're from Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Bahrain, do you want to be part of that flotilla? When you've seen that the Houthis can attack your shipping with impunity and the Americans won't do anything about it, who's going to join? It's going to be very interesting. It's interesting that the Americans have not just announced it, right? It's gotten reported that they're putting this thing together. Let's see who's in it, right? Let's see who's in it, because the American policy of not carrying out offensive countermeasures against Iran and the Houthis means that everyone knows that on the day after the war ends, they're going to be targeted by the Houthis and Iran. This is a really serious issue.
Yeah, and perhaps the accumulation of serious issues may possibly in the end tip American policy regarding Iran. I know that's your hope. That is my hope too.
No, I forgot my last point is the most important one.
Oh.
It has already tipped American policy toward Israel. This is why Jake Sullivan is in Washington, in Jerusalem this week, telling the Israelis that they have to de-escalate in Gaza.
Yeah.
It's already happened. The pressure
that happened before. We already have Amos Hochstein trying to force our hand in the north with Hezbollah.
That's a different one.
But what I'm saying is, and as you know, I'm your student on this because you taught us all about realignment. But what I'm saying about accumulation is that the Americans are putting out fires for their appeasement policy, and they're doing it by stepping on the heads of their allies like Israel. But in the end, there might be so many fires that the whole thing will go up in flame. You're shaking your head pessimistically.
Well, I'm shaking my head pessimistically because that is a possibility. But I've been following these guys for years, and there's nothing that has ever happened that has made them reconsider this policy of appeasing Iran. They just Iran provided drones to Ukraine, to Russia to use in Ukraine. Did that change their opinion? No. There's nothing that Iran can do. It's attacked the United States over 100 times since October 7th. direct attacks. I mean, okay, they're saying it's not the Iranians, it's the proxies, but these are proxies under the direct command and control of Iran 100 times, and they haven't shifted.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, and of course the odds are stacked against my position, but possibly there will be a breaking point. So it's accumulating and accumulating, and possibly, but let's leave. We don't have time for continuing this. This is your field, and I'll be happy to discuss.
I'm not gonna let you quit. I'm gonna say one more sentence.
Sure.
Long before there's a breaking point, there'll be the one shot. You know, they'll shoot a missile into Sana'a and hit some relatively significant facility, and then they'll say they're done. They'll be the one and done. We're so far from a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
That the number of things that have to change for these guys to have a different policy is much greater than what we've seen.
Well, we haven't tried a regional war, but let's save this for next time because we don't have time for a regional war. And this is a very frightening possibility. So since your dumbest take, your choice of the dumbest take on the news is more tragic than funny, and mine is more ridiculous than dumb, or both. Let's start with yours so we can we can end on a happy note, and I will see my frustrated attempt to pick on Martin Indyk from last week revisited or
okay. I'll be very quick. There's a new poll out, a very reputable poll that says a majority of Americans 18 to 24 years old think that Israel should be ended and given to Hamas. So I wanted to say to all those, that's 51% of Americans between age 18 and 24, according to this poll. I just want to say that those 51% are engaging in a very dumb take on the news. Apart from whether they like Israel or don't like Israel, the mere idea that they would say we're going to end one state and put another one in, it's just asinine.
That's not a new idea for Americans by any means. But this is very worrying, and so I can't just let it drop. So is this poll reliable in your estimation?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Who's done? Who made it?
It's the Harvard
Anti-Semitic Institution for the Study of the Jews.
Is it the Harvard Harris poll?
Wow, that is frightening. So mine is much less frightening and much more silly, and I'm going to bring it for the language. And it's a tweet by Martin Indyk. It's not the tweet that I planned to show last time. It's this tweet.
You're doing this to me because I said that we can't, because I said that I can't say anything bad about Martin Indyk. And so you're making me, I'll be silent while you talk about Martin Indyk.
Oh, so you be silent and I will not. So he's talking about the same interview with Yonit Levy, which we screened part of, and this is what he's saying. Clear that Jake Sullivan was clearly explaining U.S. strategy toward the Gaza war. Israelis should be grateful that while their leadership is playing politics, there is an American adult in the room looking out for their interests. So this is a classic peace processor, pie in the sky arrogance in still thinking that the idea that never worked and that no one supports among the Palestinians and very few among Israelis can be imposed by Americans because they are the adults in the room. And of course, they support democracy. Mike, you can't respond to that. I'm sorry. So we end here and we will see you again on Wednesday. Are you going to be still in England?
No, I'm going to be back in America.
In Washington? God. And then you have plans to visit Israel, so we can do this show
together
in one space.
Where will we do it?
We may want to rent a studio for the occasion. Bring your Christmas tree because we don't have one.
Okay, can you hear that? My mother-in-law's telephone is going off.
I
better
so
say
you
goodbye.
probably need to go to dinner or some
do.
such. So regards to your mother-in-law, Mike, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Lite.
Merry Christmas to you. Bye.